Hey everybody, welcome to the PETAL Lighting YouTube channel where we will be doing some more in-depth tutorial style videos about everything PETAL related. So in this video I wanted to go over exactly how the spool is assembled, as some of you will be receiving your aluminum parts soon. So this is one of the 8 spools I made for my rig, which I featured in the V2 rig video. I painted these black using basic Rust-Oleum spray paint, but the spool parts we will be shipping are raw aluminum, which I'll show you in a second. As you can see, these have gotten pretty scuffed up since I made that video from all the testing we've been doing, but I think it looks kind of cool personally. These are pretty easy to paint, and I can do a tutorial video on that in the future, but I think they look pretty sleek in the raw aluminum finish as well. I do have a laser engraver, so I was able to add these decals on mine, which include an arrow that points to the front of stage, and the LED number with the matching GPIO output on the controller. I'm happy to make the files for these available as well if anybody wants them, but I'm hoping some of you come up with some other creative ways to finish and label these spools. I think this will be a great way to put your own spin on the overall look of the system, maybe throw your band name or something on them, that kind of thing. So when I originally ordered my parts from Send Cut Send, they were only able to cut the parts with these little tabs that hold the 3 individual parts together. I probably spent 4 to 5 hours of work cutting these tabs and grinding them smooth, but luckily we were able to find a shop willing to do all that work for us, so you won't have to deal with any of that yourself. Your aluminum parts will come pre-separated like this, ready to be finished or assembled. So each spool consists of a few separate parts, and once you have all these parts, the assembly is pretty simple. So you have the 3 aluminum pieces, and then you've got all of the plastic pieces. So for the core, you've got a top piece of the core, a mid core, and the bottom core. Space that out a little bit so you can see it. And then you've got the 2 pieces for the socket. So you've got the actual socket here, as well as the socket cover. And then you've got the 4 electrical contacts for the socket. And those are made out of the tent pole springs, but they're slightly different shapes, so I'll show you that in a minute. The cable. So this is a 4-conductor cable, 22 gauge. And the one I used in my rig is using the aviation connectors, but the ones that we'll be shipping will have XLRs, which will be so much nicer. And with these cables, these are 4-conductor. You actually only need 3 of them, but you know, I just wanted to keep it all the same in case you wanted to do an analog rig, which does require the 4 cables. So I wanted to make it so that if you do switch over to an analog rig for whatever reason, that's not going to be a problem. You won't have to change any of the parts. And then you've got the fasteners. So you need 632 by 2-inch screws with the tapered head, as well as I used the same screws. You just need 3 of them. I used the same ones for the sockets. However, I did grind these down slightly because they protruded a little bit more, because you don't need them as long. So I do believe that 1 3/4 inch works here. I haven't confirmed that yet, though, so I want to double check that before anybody goes out and quotes me on that. But just I will confirm that. But in the meantime, yeah, you can just use the 2-inch ones. It'll protrude a little bit. You can grind them down if you want to. And then 9 of these little nuts. Also 632. And these are the cheapest nuts you can get. You can use locking nuts or whatever, but I'll show you why you don't necessarily need those. And so that's all the parts. And then you also just need either a number 1 Robertson screwdriver and a set of pliers, or if you want to be real bougie, you can go ahead with the drill and this little socket thing. I find that's a little bit easier to use. So the first step of this build, we actually are going to solder the contacts to the cables, because they actually have to be soldered inside the socket. This is something that I'm currently working on. I think I'll maybe make it so that you don't have to do this, but Also, if you're buying the kit where there's no soldering required, this will all be done for you, so don't worry about that. But if you're building this from scratch and you're 3D printing your own parts, this is something that currently with this iteration of the 3D print files, you do need to follow this specific process. So I want to just go over a couple things quickly. So the first thing, these were the old contacts for the V1 rig, and you can see they're quite large. And actually, this is a tent pole spring, and this is actually the original crease from the tent pole spring. So you can see that this contact actually uses up an entire tent pole spring, and you end up having a little bit of waste there. Funny enough, these new contacts are so much smaller, and I actually was able to use the waste from my V1 rig to make the contacts for the V2 rig. So there's a couple benefits with the V2 rig's contacts. So the first thing, obviously, you can now get 2 contacts out of 1 tent pole spring, which is really nice. The other thing too is the accuracy of these don't need to be as good. So they're a lot easier to make. I'm going to try and create a jig to make this a lot easier, maybe a 3D print thing. I'm not too sure, but right now I just bent these all by hand. It's super easy. I just basically cut this length, which I can measure out and let you know, but it's pretty straightforward once you have the socket. It's pretty easy to see. And then I just used some pliers like these and just went and kind of bent it like that. And you'll see how it fits in the socket here. So this is the socket, and these just pop right in, and they actually sit on the outside of the socket entirely. But when you look in there, once we put the case on, it actually pushes the contact into the socket, which will make the screws on the fixture touch them. So as far as actually soldering them into place, so this is where I do want to, I'll probably adjust the files eventually. So if you're watching this in the future, this might not pertain to you, but I made some design decisions that I'm realizing are kind of unnecessary. So the first things on the core, I wanted a way to route the cable so that the cable always sat lowest on the spool. Here, I can show you on the actual spool. So my thinking with adding this whole portion here was that if you have the spool entirely unwound like this, I wanted it so that the cable would sit at the bottom of the spool and not up at the top. Now, in practice, this really doesn't make a difference. Like if you had the spool upside down like this so that the cable's on the top, it really doesn't make a difference. I thought, you would have this weird like suspended cable, but it's really not the case. So the problem with this design obviously is there's a lot more to print, and you have to put the cable through this part before you solder it, because once the contacts are on, you can't easily thread it through. But anyways, if you do print the current files, this is the case, and I think it's a really sleek look and it looks nice, but there's probably a better way to do this, which I'll update. But for now, what you got to do, you're going to want to strip your wires back a little bit. What is this? About 5 inches? Yeah, that's about 5 inches there. So you're going to want to strip back about 5 inches, and then obviously give yourself some exposed wire there to solder on later. And you're going to want to feed this through your mid-core hole. So we'll feed this right through like this. And you'll see the pieces come through like this. Just like that. And so then you're going to want to take your socket. Now, the orientation obviously does really matter here. You don't have to do it the exact same as me, but you have to make sure that you're doing it the exact same as the rest of your spools, as well as all of your fixtures. And at the end of the day, you may as well do it the same as me, and that way, if everybody does it that way, we can all swap fixtures and have a good time. But otherwise, it's going to be problematic. So let me just pull up my diagram here quickly. Okay, so with the socket facing down and the little channel here, or the cable channel, you want to thread the red wire, which is the power, through this
hole here, right? So there's all these little holes. So you want to thread that one through there. The yellow one, which is the data line, goes through this one. White, which is neutral or ground, goes through here. And then the black one, which is just extra, unless you're doing an analog rig, then that's probably your voltage line or whatever. But in this case, it's just extra. I just like to solder it in so I don't have to do it later if I ever wanted to. Okay. And so that's how you solder it. So now we can go ahead and like I mentioned, or like I showed in the original V1 tutorial build, you just got to go ahead and solder all these. So I'll do that now. We'll throw a little time lapse on this so that you don't have to watch me turtle my way through this whole nonsense. I already have some solder in these, so that's why I'm just going to go ahead and solder it this way. Okay, so you should be left with an assembly that looks kind of like this. And then basically once these all cool down, ow. And then basically what you want to do is just pull these back, and then you can pop your contacts in. They can be a bit of a tight fit, but I think that's a good thing. Just like that. Now, if you are buying the kit where everything's soldered for you, you will likely receive the socket already assembled like this. This won't be on there though, because I'm gonna make it so you can put this on afterwards without having to thread the cable through, because I think that's a little bit silly now that I'm disassembling this and reassembling it. So then, once you've got this going, you can pull this cable back like this, right? And then you take the socket housing or the cover and just make sure that the cable is sitting somewhat in that channel. And this is the piece that holds the contacts in and will actually push the contacts into the socket, just like that. Right? So you can see the little contacts in there. And there is your main core piece. And then just to show you what it looks like with the other parts. So then you're going to have the top core, which fits on there, and obviously that little gap there allows the cable to pass through. And these were all designed to print flat, no supports needed, 100% infill, super straightforward. Now we can basically put the whole thing together. And I want to go over a couple things with you on that. So just give me a second to clean up and we'll put the rest together. So now that you've got your main core assembly complete, we can just basically screw the whole thing together. So there's a couple things I want to mention. So first of all, this is the bottom core, and I just want to point this out. You'll notice, especially if you're going to be printing this, these little pockets are what the bottom ring sits inside. Now I've actually added a slight little taper. So there's a slight taper that goes this way. And what that does all the way around is once this is tightened, this will actually pull the ring kind of out this way, like that. So it's almost like a bowl, or like a plate, a dinner plate, I guess. And basically what that does is it'll sit flat, even with the screws sticking out the bottom. Now what I have done in my version is I did actually countersink these holes a little bit, but you shouldn't have to, because that little extra bump out should be enough to lift the screw heads off the ground. So the first thing you're going to want to do is assemble the outer portion with the 2 rings. So this piece, I've explained the taper situation already, so I won't have to go over that again. So these will sit in there like that, all nice. And then you'll want to take your core and make sure that this is the bottom here. So the bottom, the part where this is closed in, will fit. In future versions, this will be able to go both ways, so it doesn't matter. But for this version, you want to make sure that this closed part is the part that attaches to the bottom. So I've designed the holes in this spool to be small enough so that when you stick a screw in, it's not loose. And this is by design, because I wanted to make sure that even if the little nuts on the top were to fall off, these screws are not going to fall out, and you're really going to be able to just make sure that things aren't falling apart, nothing gets loose. So I like to use a drill in this case because you have to thread this in all the way, so it takes forever if you do it by hand. But I have assembled this by hand many times, so this is just what I found works the best. And what I like to do, I basically like to get this in just so it's poking out just a little bit right there. And we'll go all the way around and do that. Okay, and then when you're putting the top core part on, you're just going to want to make sure, obviously, that you're not squishing the cable there. You want that to be free, and then you can line up your screws that you have protruding out there nice and easily, and then you can bring this in all the way. And so I don't know if you can really tell in there, it's very minor, but you get a little bit of that scoop from those bottom pieces. And then just make sure your socket's sitting on the inside. And now we can pop the top plate on, but we do want to make sure, the way I have it oriented, I put this 5th slot here, the 5th pin. See, there's 4 pins, there's a 5th pin there. That's an indexing key, and it can be a contact if you want later, but in this case that is the bottom or the back side of the spool, and then where the cable comes out is actually the front. So I like to orient this where the triangle part is pointing towards front of stage, and then so basically you can just line it up. Should pop right on like that, and then you can take your little nuts and thread them on, and you can see the 2-inch screws are going to be basically perfect for this part, but then I'll tell you about the socket part later. And so these guys go on here. And then for tightening these down, you can definitely use your pliers or whatever you got. Any wrench would work here. What I have done, and what I did do, because I did paint my spools, so I wanted to make sure I wasn't gonna mar the surface. I took a little socket like this, and I actually put tape around the edge. And what that does is it lets me confidently go ahead and screw these on. Just really confirm that we're getting a nice tight fit on there. And there you are. That's the main body of the spool now assembled. So now we just need to throw the socket on, and you'll notice here that when I take this triangle piece and I lay it onto the holes here, it actually doesn't line up perfectly. The holes on the top plate are just spaced out a little bit further than the ones on the bottom plate, and this is actually a good thing, because unlike the rest of the core, which has all of this plastic meat that holds the screws in place even if the top bolts fall off, this doesn't have that. This has a screw that runs through here and actually is kind of like floating in between. So what's good about this is it allows you to kind of adds a bit of tension on the screws by angling them just the slightest little bit. That makes sure that even if the top bolts were to fall off, you don't even need the top bolts on this one. It actually grabs on real nice. So you can just throw these in like this. Go ahead and screw these on. And then we'll go ahead and tighten these. And you're going to want to be careful about tightening this part because it's a little less obvious where it ends, where the screw ends. You could probably tighten it enough to destroy the socket. So like I said, this is solid enough now. You don't even need the top nuts on there. But I just throw them on just for visual, the visual aspect of it. I think it looks better. And then the other benefit to having those angles is they will kind of hold the nuts on a little bit better as well, because the nuts will be hitting the metal on one side, which will kind of hold it in a little bit better. And then, like I mentioned before, I used 2-inch screws for all of this. And so originally, when I first put this together, these 3 screws did protrude a bit more than these ones. And I just ground them down with a grinder, or you could use a file or anything if you wanted to, if that bugs you. You don't have to. I just know if those screws are sticking up, they're going to scratch the other spools. So I think, and maybe somebody can confirm this for me, I just haven't had a chance to, but I do believe 1 3/4 inch screws will be perfect for this, for these 3 screws. So something to keep in mind if you're open to doing a little bit of R&D for me. But I can also confirm that soon too. I just want to be clear about that, because I don't want people to wonder why the screws are sticking out so much. Okay, there you are, and that is that is your socket. So once again, this is the back. You'll see right where that fifth contact spot, or it's a key, right? That's so on my fixtures, I've got the 4 screws, and then I have an extra bolt that makes sure I can't put the fixture in the wrong way. I believe that was actually a YouTube comment that came up with that idea, so that's very cool. Yeah, and that's it. So now this can be rolled up. Just roll this down there, so I can roll this up. Just like that. And that is one of your spools. Nice and stable, not going to go anywhere. Really solid. You could stand on these. I wouldn't jump on them, especially if you're going to stand on the edge. You might end up bending something, but other than that, they're really solid, lightweight. Yeah, and that's that's how you build the spool. So side-by-side comparison. So there's the black spool, and there's the silver spool. I think the silver spool would look really cool with a similar type of decal. I think the arrow is really useful. Oh, it's this way. Let's see. I think the arrow is really useful, but if you had a band logo or something that was like, you know, oriented in an obvious way, I think that would kind of serve the same purpose as this. And then as far as the labeling here, I find this useful, especially when I need to take the whole rig apart and reassemble it. But again, but these spools, you know, it doesn't really matter which one's where. It matters when it's on the stage, but once it's on the stage, they kind of are obviously placed anyway. So this is, you know, something I just threw on there because I thought it looked cool. And then obviously this is just for cool factor. So yeah, I'm really excited to see what you all do with this. Some of you are going to be receiving your aluminum parts soon, so that's why I wanted to make this video right away. And if you have any suggestions, let me know, and we can. I mean, I'm definitely going to be making some alterations to the 3D printed parts, but they work really well as is. I've obviously tested this out quite a bit, and I'm really happy with the performance. But it's things like the having to thread the wires through both those parts before soldering. That's kind of a bit of an oversight on my part. So that's something that'll probably fix. And yeah, you know, I'm sure this design will evolve with time, and I'm really excited to see what you all do with it. And yeah, I hope this was helpful. And we're going to be doing videos like this as frequently as possible. I'm aiming for a video a week. Let's see if I can manage that. It's a lot of work, so I definitely want to try and make all the information available for you guys as easily as possible. And yeah, that's the video. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you hopefully next week.